really hate this film, and I really didn't want to have to hate it. I watched this when it aired on ABC back in 2005, and I watched it again for this show, and let me tell you, it's even more painful now than it was back then. I didn't think that was possible. I have been a huge fan of the Muppets ever since I was little. In so many ways, the Muppets proved that they were the masters of adapting public domain stories and making them incredibly entertaining, such as the Muppet Christmas Carol, Muppet Treasure Island, and the highly underrated direct-to-video Muppet Classic Theater, in which 6 different children's stories are staged and spoofed as only the Muppets can do. So you would think that the Muppets adapting The Wizard of Oz would be a no-brainer, right? Well, it sucks. It sucks big time. But why? Well, first, a little history. With the tragic death of Jim Henson back in 1990, the Jim Henson Company was unsure of how they would get along without him. This was especially true when it came to the Muppets, which is partially what gave the Muppet Christmas Carol its emotional weight. It was the first Muppet-related film to come out after Jim Henson's death, and thematically the story is all about mortality and personal legacy. Oh, and something about the spirit of Christmas and all that holly jolly crap. But adapting a public domain story like A Christmas Carol was a safe bet, as was Muppet Treasure Island in 1995 and the aforementioned Muppet Classic Theater, albeit direct to VHS. Still no DVD or Blu-ray? Not even on Disney Plus? Come on! The Muppets' efforts in the late 90s weren't as well received, such as Muppets Tonight and especially Muppets from Space. Although I liked them both and grew up with them, the general audience didn't seem to be there. The Muppets were undergoing an identity crisis, and the absence of Jim Henson was showing. So in 2004, Disney purchased the Muppets, which you'd think would mean a new golden age for the iconic characters. But outside of the outstanding 2011 film, the Muppet projects under the Disney era have been mediocre at best, and haven't connected with general audiences in the way they once did. That downward trend for the Muppets started in 2005 with their very first project in the Disney era, the ABC Movie of the Week, The Muppets Wizard of Oz. But this is Oztober, so how does it fare as an Oz adaptation? Well, because Disney doesn't own the rights to the 1939 film, they chose to adapt L. Frank Baum's original novel, which is in the public domain. This means that they have the silver shoes instead of the ruby slippers, they actually show all 4 witches, all played by Miss Piggy, of course, and they include scenes from the book that were not in the film. All good signs so far. But then we come to easily the biggest misstep. The central conflict. Dorothy, played by Ashanti, wants to become a famous singer. She just misses an audition for the Muppet equivalent of American Idol, which was huge at the time, and wants nothing more than to get away from Kansas despite her Aunt Em's protestations. However, upon arriving in the land of Oz, we learn that people there are just as shallow and stupid as they are in our world. How comforting. Dorothy's conflict with the Wicked Witch of the West, the journey of self-discovery and returning home, all that stuff, are cheapened to a simple contest of who's the biggest diva. And, of course, reality TV, award shows, and celebrity gossip are worked in. But they're not done in a way that intelligently satirizes how shallow society is, which makes the movie come across as shallow. Plus, the pop culture references are plentiful and are incredibly cringeworthy. What really hurts about this movie is that otherwise talented people such as Queen Latifah, David Alan Grier, Jeffrey Tambor, and Quentin Tarantino of all people are roped into it. Their presence is not enough to save it, not by a long shot. Tarantino's cameo in particular comes across like an incredibly forced and unfunny cutaway gag that Family Guy would do. I guess it hadn't been done to death yet back then. As for Ashanti, she was one of the big female pop stars with one name from the early to mid-2000s, like Beyonce, Ciara, Shakira, etc. I don't know how talented she is or could have been in other roles, but whatever acting talent she may have is not on display here. Then again, it's not like the script gives her a whole lot to work with. Now, remember what I said about the Muppets undergoing an identity crisis? The Disney acquisition seems to have largely made that crisis worse. Outside of the 2011 film, which I already said was one of the best Muppet films ever made, the humor in the Disney era tends to be too adult and inappropriate for children, which I would be more okay with if it was actually funny. But it isn't. And because it isn't, I notice it a lot more, and it really doesn't feel in line with who the Muppets are. The short-lived 2015 show on ABC faced similar criticism, Even though they underwent some significant course correction about midway through the first and only season, it wasn't enough to save it. The Disney Plus series Muppets Now seems to have corrected the adult humor and snarky tone of the ABC show, but it didn't really replace it with all that much either, so the result was mostly bland. This should have been a slam dunk for both the Muppets and for Oz adaptations in general. This should be among the best, but instead, it's one of the worst by far.